Madison, will you read Mark's objectives of his speech?
Yes, he is on project 1, and his objectives is to tell a folk tale that is entertaining and enjoyable for a specific age group, and to use vivid imagery and voice to enhance the tale. His time is 7 to 9 minutes.
So his time is 7 to 9 minutes. Yeah? Mark enjoys folk tales, fables, and even children's stories that demonstrate valuable life lessons with simple stories. Who Moved My Cheese, a #1 bestseller book by Dr. Spencer Johnson, is a modern-day fable about change, with many great lessons about fear, complacency, and happiness. Let's welcome Mark with Who Moved My Cheese.
Four friends lived in a maze. 2 were mice, another was a little man and his friend. The 2 little men were human, but they were just a little bit taller than the mice. They all loved cheese, and every day they had the same routine. They'd put on their running shoes and they'd run through the maze looking for cheese. The mice had simple minds. They would sniff around, and they would use trial and error to navigate the maze. The little men had much more complex minds. They had emotions and strong beliefs. These sometimes helped, but sometimes hindered their navigation through the maze. One morning, the mice put on their little running shoes very early, ran through the maze, and they came across Cheese Station 3. It was this big room with lots of cheese. So they took their shoes off, they tied them together, put them around the neck, and they sat down and they started eating cheese. The men arrived soon after, and they saw all this cheese, and it made them very happy. And days went on, and they kept these routines, except the 2 little men changed routines. They moved closer to Cheese Station 3. They started decorating. They wrote on the wall, "Having cheese makes you happy." They put their shoes away, and they sauntered through the maze to Cheese Station 3 a little bit later every day. Late morning, they would arrive. One day, the mice ran to Cheese Station 3, and there was no cheese. No cheese, not a scrap. They sniffed around the perimeter of the station, and they realized there's no cheese. They put their sneakers on, and they ran into the maze. Later that morning, the little man and his friend arrive at Cheese Station 3, and there's no cheese. And they're quite surprised. The little friend says, "Where is all the cheese? Who moved my cheese?" And they look around and they argue about what happened to the cheese until the sun goes down. And then they go home quite angry. The next day they wake up, they saunter to Cheese Station 3, almost expecting the cheese to still be there, having been returned. And it's gone. And again, the little friend says, "Who moved my cheese?" This goes on for days. They go home hungry, they go home depressed, until they're just plain tired and weak. Now the little man thinks about going back into the maze and finding new cheese, and he talks to his friend, "Let's go back into the maze. Let's find new cheese." But his friend says, "No, I'm staying right here until my cheese is returned." And he's quite afraid himself to go into the maze because it's been quite a long time since they've been exploring in the maze. And so one day he writes on the wall, "What would you do if you weren't afraid?" And he stands there and he thinks about it. And he thinks, and he realizes there's 2 kinds of fear. The one kind of fear that's good, that makes us take action and move forward. But then there's the fear that holds us back and prevents us from taking action. And he realizes that's probably a fear that's usually living inside our heads. And after he thinks about this, he puts on his running shoes and he goes off into the maze without his friend. And he's very discouraged because for days he doesn't find any cheese. And he has a lot of time to think. And he thinks, it's still better being in this maze, taking some kind of action than standing around a cheese station, a cheeseless cheese station, waiting for something to happen to me. And that keeps him motivated to move on. And eventually he finds cheese, little tiny bits of cheese. And he tastes it, and it tastes so delicious that he can't even believe this. This makes him realize, in retrospect, in hindsight, that the cheese didn't just disappear. It was slowly dwindling. And not only that, it was starting to taste bad. The cheese was going bad. But it was so insidious, and they weren't really paying attention, that neither of them noticed this. So he writes on the wall, "Smell the cheese often, so you know when it's getting old." And he continues his adventure through the mazes. He finds the little pieces of cheese and he eats them, but he also stores some in his pocket. And when his pockets are full, he heads back to cheese station 3. And he really hopes that his friend's not there anymore, that maybe he's having an adventure in the maze with plenty of cheese in his belly. But when he arrives, his friend is there, quite tired and weak, even too weak to be angry anymore. And he tells him, "There's cheese out in the maze, let's go back into the maze." And he says, "Look, I've even brought you some cheese." And his friend says, "I don't think I'd like that new cheese. I want my cheese." And he can't get his friend back into the maze. So he's quite sad, but he goes back into the maze by himself. And days go on, he's collecting these little bits of cheese, and he's eating it, and he's finding new cheese that makes him happy because he's never had it before. But he also realizes just going through the maze, the excitement of finding this new cheese makes him happy. One day, he turns the corner and he can't believe his eyes. Cheese Station N, he finds. This is way bigger than Cheese Station 3, and it is filled with all kinds of cheese, almost as far as his little eyes can see. So he goes into Cheese Station, he's looking, and at the base of one large mound, there are the 2 mice, sitting with full bellies, their sneakers around their neck, eating cheese and smiling. And so the man sits down, he takes off his running shoes and he ties them together and he puts them around his neck and he starts eating the cheese. And the mice look at him in approval and smile and nod at him. The man starts developing new routines. Every morning he gets up early, he puts his running shoes on, and he runs to Cheese Station N. He has some cheese, but then he looks around and he checks the quality and the quantity of the cheese. He sees how much cheese is there compared to the day before. And he also nibbles at cheese from around Cheese Station N to see which cheese is getting old and which cheese is fresh, and if he can find a new cheese. Also, he sits down after eating some more cheese, he gets back up, he puts his running shoes on, and he runs around the maze in areas that he's never been before around Cheese Station N. He wants to know what's going on around him. He doesn't want to have any big surprises like when all the cheese was gone in Cheese Station 3. He realizes, and he writes on the wall, "Giving up and letting go of old cheese finds you new cheese." He realizes that he's got to be diligent and he can't be complacent. The one main lesson that he's learned from this and from the mice is that you shouldn't overthink things, keep things nice and simple. And when your situation changes, take a look at your beliefs and see if you need to change with your situation. Madam Toastmaster?